Sergio Perez had yet another subpar race in which he managed to finish 8th after starting 11th on the grid, as it now seems like the Mexican driver will be more and more of a liability for the Austrian squad in the remainder of 2024. But with Red Bull previously admitting that the contract of Perez is on a 1+1 basis, could we see him being replaced prior to the new regulations? And did they subsequently lose the Constructors' Championship in 2024 by extending the deal for Sergio? It goes without saying that Perez's form needs massive improvement if he's to be considered as a legitimate candidate for the Red Bull seat in the following period, despite him receiving a 2-year contract from the Austrian squad earlier this year. However, the fact that Verstappen earned 83 points in the last 4 races, while Perez managed to earn only 8, goes to show that there's something fundamentally wrong with the second driver in Red Bull. And in Barcelona, he was open to admit that a lot could have gone better had he had a better understanding of the car. When talking about this matter in a greater extent, Perez said, "I think I understand a lot of things that happened over the weekend and during the race. The balance was quite off on the softs, so that it was quite linked to the qualifying issues we had. I was quite front limited, I couldn't get the rotation and I couldn't get the power down. The problem I have at the moment is I can't balance the car through all of the stints, struggling in the medium to low speeds to be able to have the stability I need with the rotation. Obviously this is going to be an even greater issue as we move forward in 2024 because it has become clear that Red Bull do not have the fastest car. It's just Verstappen who's able to extract everything out of the Challenger, and he is the decisive factor when it comes to the both championships. Thanks to his race wins, Red Bull are keeping a steady advantage over the rest of the competitors, and even with Perez finishing P8, the Austrian squad were able to grab the most points out of Barcelona, 29, extending their lead to Ferrari and McLaren to a greater extent. But if we're to look at the points gathered in the last 4 races from the Constructors, Red Bull are definitely facing some issues here. For example, they're trailing McLaren in this category, and Verstappen has almost single-handedly managed to outscore Mercedes, which is something that needs to ring the alarm bell in Red Bull as to whether or not they are able to keep up this momentum in the upcoming races. The obvious fact now is that if a slight mistake happens in Red Bull, it would be maximised by other teams like McLaren, who are now fine-tuning the MCL38 to be a championship contender in the second half of the season. And even if the fight at the Drivers' Championship isn't bound to happen, the Constructors' one is definitely where Red Bull will feel the most pressure, even though with Verstappen winning and Perez scoring scrap points, they'd be able to keep up the competitive edge to their rivals by small margins. The problem is that once Verstappen isn't there, like the situation in Monaco, the losses will be great because Red Bull do not have a solid second driver to rely on, like McLaren, Mercedes, and even Ferrari have. When talking about the situation with Perez, however, Horner went on to defend the performance of the Mexican driver, but urged that he would need to improve vastly in order to be considered as a solid candidate for the future of his team. As the 50-year-old Brit said, "We put Perez on a 3-stop, and it worked out. He passed Pierre Gasly on the last lap, and theoretically, we said 8th was the best that he could do today. He will have taken a bit out of this weekend, but we need to get him more into the mix, and I think the main problem was the starting position." I think Perez is doing pretty well. Things haven't gone his way, and he's a confidence-driven driver. We need him to start being in the mix, and he knows that, and the team knows that. If he's on the back end of the top 8, you lose strategic options, for example, splitting your strategies and so on. The difference in Barcelona was quite visible, because Perez finished almost a minute behind his teammate, which was partly influenced by the fact that he went on a 3-stopper strategy. But having Piastri ahead of him by 27 seconds did not help his case at all. Therefore, the pressure to deliver strong performance will only continue to mount, and even though we've been hearing statements from Horner and Marco that he can and he will deliver when it's most needed, time is slowly but surely ticking away for Perez. The primary issues was that Barcelona is a track that offers the greatest opportunity to get carried thanks to the supremacy of your car, and this is something Perez wasn't able to utilize in his own favor. Therefore, to believe that he will be able to extract a lot of performance on unusual circuits is definitely a far-fetched scenario at this point, especially after securing a 2-year deal that could very easily have the second year be deleted from the contract, as Red Bull would be looking into a stronger option next to Verstappen. Obviously, Tsunoda has expressed his wishes to be seen more commitment from Red Bull, given the fact that they've extended his contract on a one-year basis with their sister team, and even though the Japanese driver had a disastrous weekend in Barcelona with an upgraded car, he has been quite solid throughout 2024, which brought talks about eventual promotion to the senior team of Red Bull. He isn't alone with these wishes, however, as Lawson is also looking to get promoted to one of the two teams, even though that looks like a distant goal for the Kiwi driver. Nonetheless, there's a massive threat for Red Bull that they will lose a great talent that they've groomed for so long in the lower formula categories, as Liam has opened up about seeking a seat somewhere else, with Audi now emerging as a serious candidate to sign him in the upcoming period if they do not come to an agreement with drivers like Sainz and Ocon. All of this points towards the fact that Perez's consistency is something that will haunt Red Bull in the upcoming future, now that the grid is closing up. And even though Perez is a secured bet for the Drivers' Championship, as he won't pose any threat for Verstappen, there is a lot more to play for here as well. Being consistently slower than your teammate with numbers that are quite staggering, varying from 5 to 8 tenths per second, is definitely not boding well for the future of your career. And at this point, if Perez is not in the Red Bull seat, I highly doubt that there will be another candidate who will be interested in his signature. Furthermore, Red Bull have clearly shown where their priorities lay with Perez, as the sponsorship money from Telmex, the main sponsor of Perez, are clearly too sweet to give up from. And on top of that, it seems like merchandise is being sold in Latin America a lot more concentrated on Perez rather than on the other driver, Max Verstappen. That, however, is a ticking time bomb, and it's obvious that Red Bull cannot always rely on this, now that the competition is fiercer than ever. The Austrian team have acknowledged the danger that's coming from the other teams, especially from McLaren, who have undoubtedly had the fastest car from Miami onwards, but haven't been able to capitalize on more race wins due to the driver factor. If we're to look at Perez's performance, then we'd understand where the team would be had it not been for the three-time world champion, who was asked as to whether or not it would be hard to keep the Constructors' Championship alive, and his response was quite cheeky. Verstappen said that he's fighting alone against the other teams. This is something that even Norris went on to say in an interview, saying that the battle in the Constructors' Championship is between them and Ferrari. But if we're to look at the last race in Barcelona, as long as Verstappen is winning, there isn't any battle active, because even with Perez scoring minimal points, he's able to keep the momentum alive and not lose the championships by slim margins. Something that will be vastly changed if Verstappen won't be at the highest step of the podium. When talking about extracting the absolute maximum of the car due to Perez's underperformance, and the fact that the rest of the grid have caught up with Verstappen and Red Bull, the three-time world champion was adamant that he's doing that in the past couple of races, and the only reason why he's winning the races in an inferior car is because his team doesn't make mistakes, and the championship winning experience is what brings the massive difference between him and the rest of the grid. With all of this in mind, do you think that Perez is the right choice for Red Bull as they're headed into the 2026 regulations, given the fact that everything will be mixed and we'll have no idea what to expect from all the teams on the grid? And more importantly, who do you think would be a proper replacement for the Mexican driver if the Austrian team decides to activate the clause and get rid of him from 2026 onwards? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, make sure to click on the video that appears on your screen right now.